So this verse is used by wolves in sheep's clothing to argue for the pro-choice position. They don't just argue that the Bible is neutral on abortion. They actually use this verse to argue that the Bible is okay with. It actually thinks abortion can be okay. So that is Exodus 21, 22 through 25. And it talks about a man who unintentionally injures a pregnant woman that causes her to give birth earlier to have a miscarriage. So here's what it says. It says, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay, so the woke Christian argues that this scripture proves that the unborn are not fully human because the penalty for accidentally killing a fetus is less than that for killing its mother. So if you accidentally kill the fetus, the penalty is less than if you accidentally kill the mother. So they're going to say that, well, look, why would the penalty be less for killing a fetus if the fetus was equally valuable to the mother? So because of the discrepancy in the punishment, the Bible is saying that born women have more value or personhood or right to life than their preborn children. Now, I'm going to show you actually that I don't even think this is the right interpretation. But even if it is, we're going to find that this argument or this section of scripture does not support abortion, even if that interpretation is correct. So what's wrong with this argument? The first is that even if this interpretation is correct, right, granting their interpretation, it doesn't follow or prove that the unborn are not fully human. What do I mean by that? The passage directly before this section in Exodus 21 presents a situation where a master is not required to be punished if he beats his slave with a rod, but the slave recovers in a day or two. So would the same pro-choice Christian argue that the slave is not fully human because there's no penalty for beating him? The penalty's less, or there's no penalty for beating the slave. A discrepancy in punishments. That must mean that the slave is not a human and we can kill them, right? Of course not. They're not going to defend that the Bible is somehow okay with beating people. So, of course, they're willing to say that because it's a lesser punishment for accidentally killing a fetus, that the fetus must not be a human so we can abort them, right? So they're not consistently even applying that standard. And that's assuming that the interpretation of this text is correct, which I'm going to get to in a little bit, that I don't think it is. The second thing that's wrong with this argument is that, again, even if this interpretation is correct, it cannot be used to support the pro-choice position, which is abortion on demand. Abortion for any reason or no reason at all, procured by their mother through all 9 months of pregnancy. Scott Klusendorf correctly says regarding this argument, he says, this passage in Exodus, however, does not even remotely suggest that a woman can willfully kill her unborn child without justification. At best, it only shows that there is a lesser penalty for accidentally killing her unborn offspring than there is for accidentally killing her. Even if the interpretation is correct, right? Scott accurately points out that that doesn't defend the pro-choice position, which is abortion on demand, secured by the mother who helps arrange the death of her child for any reason or no reason at all. So those are the first two problems with using Exodus 21, saying that there's a less punishment for killing a fetus than the mother, so therefore the fetus must not be a human with rights. And that's assuming that the interpretation is correct. Here's the third problem with this argument, and it does have to do with the interpretation of the passage. There is very good reason to believe that the pro-abortion interpretation of this passage is deeply flawed, because the key question in interpreting this passage in Exodus 21 is to ask, no serious injury to whom? No serious injury to whom? Who are we talking about? Because you remember the passage says if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there is no serious injury, the offender must be fined, right, etc. But no serious injury to whom? Who are we talking about? The pro-abortion Christian, of course, is going to argue that the phrase no serious injury only applies to the mother. Only applies to the mother. But the text is not clear in saying that it's only referring to injury obtained by the mother. But if you render the passage this way, then the passage comes to mean that if you accidentally kill an unborn child and there is no serious injury to the mother, you only have to pay a fine. But if there is serious injury to the mother, you must pay life for life. In other words, kill an unborn baby, pay a fine. Kill the mother, you'll be killed too. That's how they're interpreting the passage. But only a few translations interpret the verse in this way. So what's the Hebrew say? Well, the Hebrew term asan, which means harm or injury, is indefinite in its reference, meaning we're not sure who it's referring to, who the injury is referring to. And then the Hebrew term, or expression rather, lah, L-A-H, which means to her, which would identify the word injury to the mother, is missing. That expression, to her, is missing. If it was there, then you could say injury to her, but it's missing. So the phrase no serious injury seems to actually apply to both the mother and the child, meaning that if either one of them is harmed, then the penalty is life for life, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, etc., right? And according to Hebrew scholar Dr. Gleason Archer, he says regarding this passage, quote, there is no second-class status attached to the fetus under this rule. The fetus is just as valuable as the mother. So it seems entirely reasonable and appropriate in interpreting this passage to actually come away with a very pro-life perspective that values the life of the mother and the fetus equally. Now, Greg Kokel, president at Stand to Reason, makes this excellent observation regarding this passage as well. He asks the question, why should we presume that the miscarriage in Exodus 21 produces a dead child? He points out that the Hebrew word for miscarriage in this context is yasa, Y-A-S-A, which almost always refers to the emergence of a living thing. So a very different understanding of the word miscarriage as used in the Hebrew. So in that case, the passage could be translated to say this, right? If we take all of this interpretation, here's how we could correctly interpret the passage. I'm going to reread it with this understanding of the interpretation. If people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely to an alive child, but there is no serious injury to the child or the mother, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury to the child or the mother, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. So when we actually exegete this passage correctly, we're actually given an incredibly pro-life perspective, the complete opposite of what the pro-choice woke Christian who is defending the slaughter of image bearers while espousing Christ wants you to come away with.